The desert night was supposed to be silent. But silence doesn't last long when metal tears through the air. The explosion ripped the world apart, sand, fire, and steel spraying into the sky like a nightmare. Corpsman Elise Ramirez had been crouched low behind a Humvee, her heart pounding in her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. At least, that's what everyone around her had told her from day one. Too small. Too soft. She won't last a week with us. The SEALs she was attached to had made their thoughts clear. They were polite in the way you might tolerate a burden you didn't ask for. Some were harsher. She remembered one smirk from training. "Hope you can carry more than a Band-Aid kit. Document out here. You're dead weight unless you can haul a man twice your size." Now, one of those very men was screaming. The blast had flipped the lead vehicle. 2 SEALs lay motionless in the dirt, sprawled like broken statues. Another was pinned beneath twisted steel, blood streaming from his thigh, his hands clawing at the sand. Gunfire cracked from the ridge. The ambush was unfolding fast. And Elise was the only one still moving. Her ears rang from the concussion. Her chest ached from the shockwave. She could feel the edges of panic trying to swallow her whole. But then, something else cut through: training, discipline, a voice drilled into her since Corps school. "When it all breaks down, corpsman, you go forward. You go toward the wounded." She shoved her fear down and scrambled out from cover. Bullets hissed past, snapping the air. The SEAL pinned under steel looked at her with eyes wide as a child's. "Don't stay back! You'll get hit!" But she was already dropping beside him, her hands moving before her mind caught up. Tourniquet, pressure, drag. His blood soaked into her sleeves, sticky and hot. The weight of his gear made him impossible to lift outright. She used leverage, grit, every ounce of strength in her 5 feet 5 inches frame. Inch by inch, she hauled him free. A voice shouted from behind. "Ramirez! Get down, damn it!" But there was no time to answer. The second man was coughing blood, his chest rising shallowly, every breath sounding like a drowning gurgle. Elise dropped to her knees, ripped open her kit, and forced an airway in place with trembling but precise hands. She pressed her ear close. The faint whistle of oxygen returning filled her with fire. Still, the ridge spat gunfire. The SEALs with rifles were returning fire, but they were pinned. No one could break to cover her. She was alone in the open, kneeling over dying men. The third was worse. His leg was shredded, arterial blood pooling fast in the dirt. His lips were already blue. Without thinking, Elise tore her own belt free, cinching it high above the wound, her arms trembling as she wrenched it tight. His scream ripped through the night. He lived. For now. By the time she realized it, her hands were slick, her uniform soaked, and 3 massive men who had once joked she couldn't even lift their packs, were lying alive in front of her. But survival in war is never guaranteed. The fight wasn't finished. She could feel it in the air, the way the gunfire ebbed and flared, the shouted commands, the sharp edge of chaos pressing in from all sides. And in the chaos, a single thought cut through, bitter as salt. They had all said she wouldn't last. Now 3 lives hung on her fragile frame. The ridge went quiet for half a second, as if the desert itself had drawn breath. Then the crack of a sniper shot split the night, so close Elise felt the wind of it slice past her cheek. Her head snapped up. Somewhere out there, beyond the shadows, death was taking aim again. And Elise Ramirez had to decide: run for cover and save herself, or stay in the open to shield the broken men who had never believed in her. She chose. And the desert would never forget what she did next. To understand Elise's choice that night, you have to know the road that brought her there. She had grown up in San Antonio, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Life was never cruel to her, but it was never easy either. She was the smallest kid in every class, the one teachers overlooked and bullies circled. Her mother would say, "Mija, you don't need to fight to be strong. You just need to endure." Endurance became her secret weapon. When she enlisted as a Navy corpsman, she knew exactly how people would see her: too quiet, too slight, too soft for combat medicine. The instructors barely hid their doubts. One even muttered under his breath on her first day of field training, "She'll wash out." But Elise didn't wash out. She stayed. Through blistered feet, endless drills, and nights where her hands shook from exhaustion, she endured. Still, even as she graduated, she could feel the skepticism clinging to her. It followed her into deployment, where she was attached to a SEAL team whose members had seen things she couldn't imagine. Men hardened by years of combat looked at her with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "You sure you're ready for this, Doc?" one asked, shouldering a pack that weighed more than she did. Elise only nodded. "Doesn't matter if I'm ready. It matters if I'm needed." But no matter how much she trained, the little slights piled up. A radio operator called her "our lucky charm," in a tone that meant the opposite. Another joke that she was only there to hand out ibuprofen. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. In their eyes, she wasn't one of them. And yet she kept preparing. Quietly, relentlessly. Late at night, when others slept, she would practice lifting stretchers loaded with sandbags, sweat dripping into her eyes, her breath ragged but steady. She studied trauma manuals until the words blurred. She rehearsed every possible emergency, because somewhere deep inside she knew, one day, her moment would come. But training alone couldn't erase the sting of doubt. There were nights she lay awake in her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling, asking herself the questions she couldn't silence. What if they're right? What if I'm not enough? She thought of her mother again. Endure, Mija. So she endured. And then, the desert exploded. When that blast tore through the convoy and the mocking voices vanished into screams of pain, Elise finally understood the truth. No one cared about her size, her gender, or the jokes anymore. In that moment, there was only one thing that mattered. Could she save them? And in her bones, despite the doubts, despite the fear, she knew the answer. The ambush deepened. The firefight raged for what felt like hours, though Elise knew it was minutes at most. Time in combat doesn't move like time in life. It stretches, it collapses, it claws at you with both hands. Pinned in the dirt with 3 wounded men, Elise worked faster than thought. She packed wounds, checked pulses, whispered steady reassurances that were half for them, half for herself. "Stay with me. Breathe. You're not done here yet." One of the SEALs, the one with the chest wound, grabbed her wrist weakly. His lips moved. She leaned close and heard it through the rattle in his throat. "Didn't think you had it in you." The words cut her deeper than the bullets flying overhead. Not with anger, but with clarity. They had doubted her every step. But even in doubt, they were depending on her now. She pressed his hand back against his chest and whispered, "Neither did I." A decision loomed. They couldn't stay pinned in the open. The convoy was disabled. Reinforcements were still miles out. And the men she'd stabilized needed evacuation, or all her work would mean nothing. Her eyes darted toward the damaged Humvee. Smoke curled from its hood, but the rear offered partial cover. If she could drag them there one by one, they might survive long enough for extraction. The first haul nearly broke her. 180 pounds of muscle and gear scraping across the dirt as she staggered backward, sweat blinding her eyes. Every tendon screamed. She bit down on the pain and pulled until her knees buckled beneath the Humvee's shadow. Gunfire tracked her path, but she didn't stop. The second trip was worse. The man with the chest wound coughed blood with every step she dragged him. Elise kept whispering, "Almost there. Almost." She knew if he lost consciousness now, he might never wake again. She dragged harder. By the third, her body was beyond exhaustion. Her arms shook, her lungs burned, and when she crouched to grab the shredded leg of the last SEAL, she wasn't sure she could lift him at all. But then she remembered the nights lifting sandbags alone. She remembered every doubt, every mutter, every laugh at her expense. And she told herself, "This is what you trained for." She screamed with the effort and dragged him into cover. By the time all 3 were sheltered, Elise collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming. She didn't know if the firefight would end in victory or defeat. But she knew one thing with certainty. They were alive. And they were alive because she refused to be what they said she was. But the fight wasn't done. The enemy was closing in. She could hear their shouts now, closer, sharper, like wolves circling prey. And Elise Ramirez, blood-soaked and trembling, prepared herself for the choice that would define her forever. The sound of helicopters came first, a low thunder rolling over the desert night. Reinforcements. The SEALs, still pinned down, cheered hoarsely, their rifles spitting one last line of defense. The enemy fire faltered, then broke, retreating into the shadows as the roar of American gunships cut the air. When the dust settled, Elise was still crouched between her three patients, hands locked on wounds, eyes glazed with exhaustion. She didn't even look up until one of the arriving medics touched her shoulder. "Doc, we've got them now." Only then did she release her grip. One by one, the wounded SEALs were lifted into evacuation choppers. Elise stumbled in after them, her arms streaked with blood that wasn't hers. Her whole body shook, not from fear, but from something deeper: relief, disbelief, and the quiet, searing pride that comes only after walking through fire. In the days that followed, word spread. Not just through her unit, but through the whole base. The story of the too small medic who had dragged 3 SEALs out under fire became something whispered with all. Men who once doubted her now looked her in the eye with something new: respect. One of the very SEALs who had mocked her strength gripped her hand with tears in his eyes and whispered, "I owe you my life." But Elise didn't need their validation anymore. She had learned something in the dust and fire that night, something truer than any insult or praise. Strength isn't always loud. Dignity doesn't always come dressed in muscle and bravado. Sometimes, it comes in quiet endurance, in small frames carrying impossible weight, in hands that refuse to let go even when the world says they should. Elise Ramirez had been told she wouldn't last. But dignity, her dignity, had carried her through when nothing else could. And in that truth, she stood taller than anyone could have imagined.